Welcome to the Narrator Roundtable. I'm André Santana, and joining me today we have Lindsey.
Hello.
We've got Kirt.
Greetings.
And we have Deanna.
Hello.
Hey, y'all. So when I started narrating, I built this pyramid in my head, right? I heard all these stories across Facebook about what the most bottom of the barrel work is, unedited ACX royalty share titles, and then what the cream of the crop is, like in-studio, high-rate, directed, Big Five publisher New York Times titles. And suddenly, I knew what work I had to chase and what would make me a real big-time New York narrator, and there was a system and steps, and then suddenly all those things fell apart. Not only were the rules changing, you no longer needed 60 titles to work for a Big Five, and I regularly saw people doing their first titles with them. It also seemed like there was this undeniable truth emerging over time. I did Big Five titles that didn't get reviews or visibility. Indie titles flew off the virtual shelves. And more importantly, when I wasn't working for royalty share, visibility didn't really impact my bottom line. And I know a lot of narrators who've had to double back on their first mindsets about what the best work was to chase in the industry. And when I heard from this narrator that they were excited to talk about the subject, I knew we had to get them to the roundtable. How else can we say it? The girls love this narrator. Earphones, Audie's best of list. He's an accomplished narrator across genres, an entertaining presence on social media, and we're just so lucky to have him today. So welcome to the pod, Ronnie Butler.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you for the really lovely introduction. That's really sweet. Thank you.
And I kind of just want to open up the table. I mentioned this for me came from Facebook, but how did these kind of stories, narratives, ideas about what is the best work reach each of you?
Well, it's so funny because when I first started out, I started dabbling in 2017. The narrative that I heard was you have to sort of pay your dues on ACX. You have to get your stripes. Nobody's even going to want to talk to you until you have done a certain number of ACX books. And I will admit that I'm up until then when I was I want to get into audiobooks. I want to learn about this. Indie publishing was not on my radar at all. And I have always been a voracious reader, but I've just either gone to the library or gone to my local independent bookstore and gotten books that way. It never occurred to me, I was never on Kindle or Kindle Unlimited. I didn't look on Amazon for books because I would rather go and touch them in my bookstore and talk to the bookseller there. So as a reader, indie was not on my radar pre-2017. And I think the landscape was different then too. I feel you had to be looking on Amazon to find that stuff. And so it entered my awareness, my consciousness for the first time when I was when I started trying to get into audiobooks. So it was a brand new thing of what is this indie publishing thing? What does that look? And is it just weirdos who can't get published anywhere else who were who wrote manifestos in their basement? Or as I discovered, is it also full of a lot of really cool, creative, amazing authors who have just chosen a different path for their work?
Yeah, when I started, and I think I want to say I started around 2014, between 2012 and 2014, somewhere in there. I didn't even know ACS existed. I was sort of and it did exist. And in fact, I know people who are to date making money off of books they recorded then, because it was a different playing field then. It was not many people knew about it. But my point is, I was blissfully ignorant, and I came into this industry. I didn't even think about it as an industry. I didn't think about any of the mechanics of it or the structure of it for years. I just sort of, I got a book. Okay, they want me to do a book. Oh, I'll do a book. And so it wasn't until much later that I learned the whole thing about ACX and that pyramid that you talked about. And that's because I had people coming to me for coaching going, I want to get out of ACX. I want to get with a publisher. This was the main goal for people. It was sort of it was the thing that they were striving for, I think, from both a money point of view and a status point of view, right? Yeah. A feeling of accomplishment. So I didn't really know about it until much later. And I'm curious, André, because you said that the landscape is changing and that sort of model is blown up, and I want to know what you mean by that, and where does that, like, where do you sense that? Where's that coming from?
Yeah, I feel like that was this is like a classic pre and post COVID shift in the industry. I think on Facebook before 2020 and into that year, anyone who you were coaching with, anyone who you were asking about that exact transition, because I think even in how we've talked about it so far, it's the presumption for a lot of people that you go from ACX to indie, that big publishers would only start working with you. These production companies would only start working with you once you had a portfolio that you had proved yourself with. And the number was anywhere from like 20, 30, 40, all the way to 60 titles before, Macmillan would call you back, before Penguin would call you back. And after the shift, I think with the significant increase in, narrators in the industry, like I said, plenty of people have done some of their earliest titles with Big Five publishers. My third novel was with Harper, because they were, one, trying to cast more diversely. They were trying to work with a wider set of narrators. There were all these different reasons that they, had opportunities to take chances with newer folks, or sometimes just the budget to put you in a studio and give you a director and whatever it was. So this rule about don't reach out to these production companies, again, the presumption being that's where we want to go.
Yeah.
Before 60 titles, it just didn't stand in the same way anymore.
Yeah. I have to say, when I started, I did not feel that pressure to get to the Big Five. I guess it didn't feel like there was a path. I was an at-home hobbyist narrator. And I would do the indie work, and I could work with small indie publishers, and I could work with independent authors, but there wasn't a staircase or a ladder to doing better work. I shouldn't say better, more prestigious, more
high profile work.
Yeah. But the pandemic did change that, because those of us who were already working in home studios, who had created our own spaces and could master our own, could engineer our own audio, we were suddenly getting emails in March of 2020, who can do this from home? And there was a shift, because it was suddenly those of us who had the space at home, had the equipment, we were being contacted by people who had only ever gone into studios, and they were asking us questions like, how do I do this, and how do I get work if I'm not just walking through the hallways at Penguin and somebody says, oh, I thought of you for this book. So the pandemic certainly did change things, because even though I went to APAC in 2019, it was never with an eye on well, I got to meet these Big Five people who can give me the work like that. It was just, I'm going to become better at what I do, and I'm relegated to this level because I don't live in New York or LA or Chicago, and I will only ever work by myself remotely. And so this is what I get. So it was sort of a revelation of COVID that no, you're putting out the same quality of raw audio that people are in studios. And so you are eligible for that work, and you can and should be reaching out. And it's to a degree, it's difficult to reframe your thinking, because some of us have been very fortunate to be working consistently in indie markets the whole time. And so there's a bit of a lack of drive to leave it when it's plentiful and paying just fine.
Yeah. Paying just fine, if not better.
Sometimes. And let's set aside if you got in at the right time in ACX and you got one of those royalty share deals with a book that actually did well,
or when they used to have stipends. I got in right after that stopped, and everyone was like, are the stipends coming back? And let me tell you the tales of the days of the stipends. And I'm like, we're never having that again. That was a golden moment, and I just missed it.
It was nice.
Oh, yeah. Kurt's like, I remember.
I got the one gig.
Nice.
But yeah.
It's interesting because, and I think there are going to be some other spaces where we get to kind of dive into different parts of what this means. But even just as we talk about this, I'm feeling like indie and publisher work doesn't necessarily even reflect the distinctions or divisions all the time. That like someone whose print book, goes out with Penguin, they retain the rights and they're going to go right and hire their own narrator. Is that an indie book? If that's a one-on-one. Additionally, like the inverse is also happening a lot. Dungeon Crawler Carl is a great example of a book produced indie. The audiobook is doing really well. A publisher comes in and buys it, and doesn't necessarily redo the audiobook, but does the print book, right? Like there's all these kind of different distinctions. And it feels sometimes like the real distinction is actually what's housework, like who is producing things that has a roster that can think of you for different projects versus like what's lead work. Where are you going out and identifying individuals or connecting with individuals who are going to ask you to produce something? But ultimately, like, yeah, it's that underlying question or that underlying presumption that I think we keep getting at, that like more and more, wherever the narrative comes from, people assume that they should be working up to publisher work, or they assume that they should be walking away from or working away from ACX work.
Well, and specifically ACX, yeah, I've walked away from ACX. I don't check ACX anymore. But that has nothing to do with a bias against ACX. It's that the marketplace has changed.
Mm-hmm.
There are not jobs there for someone like me who asks what I ask for now. Like they're just not there. There's tons of royalty share where you can take a swing and maybe get lucky. Great place for beginners to get some mileage on work that probably deserves to be an audiobook, because I know plenty of indie authors who do great work, but like don't sell enough to actually pay for an audiobook. But like if I'm looking to pay my bills, I'm not going to ACX to make money.
And so what shifted the vision for everybody? And Ronnie, I know you mentioned that you came from this like relationship to audiobooks where you didn't necessarily know that was the narrative until you started coaching. But I guess what for you then, what like led you to see this as a value you wanted to identify about this industry, that there wasn't necessarily a better or worse between these options?
Yeah, it's having done all of the kinds of work, and as you said, having had the experience of having books that were independent or from a non-Big Five but digital producers get Audie nominations and get reviewed, and having books from the Big Five not necessarily. And I started. I don't know if I ever had an epiphanal moment, but I had this feeling of, the thing that I visualize for myself is, as much as I can, I want to do quality books. Meaning, and when I say quality books, that is my subjective experience of the book, right? I want to have books that I'm passionate about, that set me on fire, that I connect with, that make where I have the ability to help the text sing because it's such a good match and I get it and I feel it and boom, boom. That's what's fulfilling. And so I started coming to this place of, I want to be fulfilled. Right. And my sense of, so I'm being very personal here. My sense of fulfillment went from, I need to get these awards and I need to get this notoriety and I need to have on my resume that I work for so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so too. I want to be fulfilled. If I've got to be in that booth for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, I want to feel like I'm being an artist. And I started discovering that meant that the books that made me feel that way didn't come from just one place.
Yeah, it's similar to Ronnie. I think one of my shifts was that once I reached a point where I felt comfortable asking for what I wanted, reaching out to publishers or whoever, sparingly but consistently with like, hey, I see this book is coming up and I'm excited about it. Because I've always, like I said, I've always been a reader. So I've always sort of like had my eye on that stuff. And now I have even more motivation to be like, what's coming? And, and so I'm thinking less about publisher first and going, publisher, what books are coming out? I'm just like, what are the books? And whether it's like looking at upcoming lists or following people I like on social media and then following people they like and whatever, I just have my ear to the ground of like, what's coming? And when I see a book that I'm like, ooh, that looks like a fun book. Then the next step is who has it? Not right, and sometimes it's a publisher. And then I have to say, okay, do I have sort of enough like credits saved up that I feel like I can ask for this one? Or, ooh, I just asked them for that one, so I'm going to hold off. Or sometimes I'm like, who has it? And it's an indie book. And then I get to reach out to the author and be like, your book looks amazing. Why do you have an audiobook in the works? What's going on? Let's chat. So similar to Ronnie, it's like, I'm going book first. If the book just happens to be indie, then it's just like an easier way. Then I definitely get to ask for it, because that's how that's how I get indie books for the most part, is I just talk to the authors and say, your book looks cool. So, I'm less concerned about the status of it rather than like the book itself, when I'm out hunting, that is.
That's so interesting, because when I'm approaching this conversation specifically about the difference between indie and publisher work, status is all I'm thinking about. Because I just feel from where I sit that, yeah, you can be fulfilled, you can make money. If that's your only goal, you can live on indie work. But if you want attention, you need to get in with the publishers, because it happens every so often that like there's an award given to an indie book, or like there's an audiophile review for an indie book, but it's very rare. Mm-hmm. If you want attention, if you want your name out there, you to me, you have to be.
But it depends on what kind of attention, because I would argue, Kirt, you probably get a lot of attention from a lot of fans in those indie circles, probably more than some people who only work for publishers do. You probably get a lot more fan attention and like fan following than those people do.
Yes, but that doesn't beget more work necessarily.
Sure. Yes. So attention that begets work specifically. But like, I feel like there's some narrators who like work mostly in indie or solely in indie who have like, whether it's romance or like lit RPG, who have like a huge fan base who's like, and if you talk to any of those fans, they'd be like, Bonnie Turpin, who, like, not because she's not like,
bless you, Bonnie.
Because she's an incredible narrator who, to my knowledge, works mostly for publishers. And they're like, no, but I know Kirt Graves because he does all my favorite, male romances, and I've listened to everything he's ever done. So it's like a different, but yes, attention from publishers usually, in my experience, comes from publisher books.
Yes. Yeah.
And do you and Kirt, is that attention sort of like Lindsey just said, is that attention synonymous with begetting more books and begetting more money, or exactly what? Because you're getting plenty of books, right? Fortunately. Yeah. Yeah. So is it so more specifically, what is it about more specifically?
Prestige.
Okay. And that's legitimate
in the industry,
that's legitimate
to get the kind of attention that the types of things that you can put in an email signature. Or as we've talked about on this podcast before, like when you're filling out those rosters and they have the section for awards and recognition, yes, it's wonderful to have many reviews and to go to a male romance conference and be showered with attention. It feels great. It's wonderful. But I'm still filling out those rosters and getting to awards and recognition and skipping right by it. Thank you. Next.
Yeah. I think this is a journey for me that I feel like I've talked a lot about on this podcast in particular, is like figuring out exactly how to be part of that network. But I do think that ultimately it is a third thing there's a limit to how much work the work begets. There's a limit to how much begetted work gets you visibility beyond the publishers. So that's to say, like producers can like you. They can, if there's books that they can just cast, they may be more likely to cast you for those books. there are also plenty of books in all these like production houses and these publishing companies that have a lot of author say on final casting decisions. And often the line between cool, a producer's going to put you up and have you audition versus the author actually follows through with you is part of your external visibility, which isn't necessarily something you're getting inherently from publisher work. I've done plenty of publisher books that to this day don't have a single Audible review, and not because they're bad books. Plenty of, and I think that exists in both sides. Like, of course, everyone's going to do your, like, I keep saying ACX as if it's this representation of indie work, and it really isn't anymore. But indie work that similarly doesn't get reviews or doesn't get attention. And so I hear about how there is like a tighter circuit between like audiophile, Audis, APA. There is clearly this like internal network of kind of where a lot of the like most prestigious recognition in audiobooks comes from, for sure. And I think there's a limit. And I don't think publisher work is the only way to get past that limit if you are interested on being on the other side of it. Mm-hmm. And part of what people have found in the indie space too, like Lindsey said, in romance spaces and lit RPG and some of these other spaces, is this ability to actually be more in community, more in connection with maybe authors who are putting out a lot of work and a lot of very popular work, people who are more in more direct conversation with their listeners that results in like a direct fan base for you. And they're just very different spaces, especially considering that there's plenty of publisher work where like they're going to send out advertisements and your name's not going to be on any of it. Almost none of it's going to be about you. You know,
the other reward that I think comes from the kind of attention I'm thinking about is variety. Because in my experience, the prevalent audiobooks that are offered to me from the indie market are romance. And I know there's also like lit RPG is another area where there's a strong indie market. My experience has not been that other genres have the same strength of the indie market. And so the result has been that I don't think it's an exaggeration to say 99% of my work has been in romance.
Yeah.
And I love romance and I want to keep doing romance and I'm happy to do romance. But I would be much happier if it was 70% of my workload and I had a chance to do some other things every once in a while. And that is where having the connections help, because that's when every once in a while I get a middle grade that's not a romance, or I get something that's not just what I usually do. Yeah. And that variety is the spice of life, I think, can make doing this job more fun, more rewarding, more fulfilling.
Yeah, that's real.
I think you're absolutely hit the nail on the head. I think you're absolutely right. I do think that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna follow up with what you were saying by mentioning that many, let's for lack of a better term say, veteran narrators that I know, accolades, awards, all that stuff aside, with the shift in the industry in the past couple of years, all those things notwithstanding, are having to hustle for work. Even though all they've done is work for publishers and they have awards out the yin yang, they're hustling for work. And that is the truth. I'm not blowing smoke here because I've had conversations with them, right?
In a way they hadn't had to before?
Yes. But I think I take your point because I think I have to say that it's from a place of privilege, because I have been able to do work from all over the place. And that is the one thing that is probably one of the reasons why I'm so happy doing the work, is that I do work from all over the place. And probably having a review of a middle grade book catches the eye of people who do middle grade, and having a review in somebody that's a lit fiction catches the eye of those people. And so while all that work doesn't come from the same people, the different work comes from different publishing houses and different indie people. I would say I would have to say that, yeah, probably that having that exposure and those different things has opened up those diverse markets. That, and also some hustling on my part, I have to admit. Yeah.
Yeah. That's where I first like listened to you, Ronnie, was King and the Dragonflies.
Oh my God, I can't believe I was thinking about that book earlier today. I was thinking, if they asked me what's the favorite book, because people always ask you that on a podcast, I would have to say that's one of the top ones.
Perfect.
Not on this podcast. We don't.
Yeah.
Hashtag
We're
not
like
other podcasts.
Yeah. We're like, what's making you angry? What should we fix?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's real. I wonder, I guess part of maybe the mission in my head, and I feel like every time I produce an episode, I like halfway through, I'm like, oh, actually something else is going on here. I feel like maybe the mission in my head really is to think more multidimensionally about how these two worlds link together for narrators in a way that doesn't feel like there's just a chasm between them. And I think like the oversimplifications are rife. The assumption that like indie means that you're always completely producing the work, that a publisher means that there's like inherently more visibility in one way or another, kind of like we've been talking about. Like there are all these adjustments to the realities of these different kinds of like sources for audiobook work. And I think my head is just trying to explore like what do healthy ways to link these things together look like, because I think some people are perfectly well served doing just indie work. Some people are perfectly well served just doing publisher work. And I think folks in the middle are trying to explore like how to weave that bridge better for themselves.
I mean, I'm just always trying to create a diverse ecosystem for myself. And like approaching, because like you said, there's all these little in-betweens, right? Like if the book was published indie, but Tantor is doing the audio, is that an indie book? I mean, I don't think of it the same way, because they're, I work with Tantor producing an indie book the same way I work with, Macmillan or whoever, in terms of like, they're handling the editing, the pickups, all that stuff. They're casting me. But I'm just trying to like keep all the layers and keep all the cogs turning, because looking at like the past couple of years, if I tried to rely on only my publisher work, I would not make enough money. If I tried to rely on only my indie work, I would not make enough money. Like I need both of them, and I need to keep them working together, and I need to like both connect with indie authors and connect with publishers and connect with traditionally published authors, because like you said, André, a lot of times that more and more these days, which I think is really cool in a lot of ways, that traditionally published author often has, whether it's the last say and sometimes even the first say. Sometimes that published author comes in and says, I want this audiobook narrator, because they've been paying attention to like who they like and who's going to suit their book, and they already have that idea in their head. So like connecting with those people too. So I'm just trying to like plant all my little seeds and grow some little trees and some little mushrooms, and like have both foxes and bunnies in my forest. I just played the Forest Shuffle board game, so it's in my head. But I'm like, I need a diverse ecosystem of all the animals in my forest, plants and animals in my forest. And that's how I think of it.
I mean, yeah. I like in listening and everything, like at first I wasn't really sure what the focus was for the question of what this conversation is. And I think I have the gist of it. And following Ronnie's lead, kind of speaking personally, as an actor, that translates to the audiobook world specifically for me, where even though people were telling me that there was a difference, I didn't see a difference. Like the first romance conference I went to, there were traditionally published authors who were also publishing in the indie sphere for specific titles. So they were introducing themselves as hybrid published authors. So knowing that that was an option, and then you have a book that the hardcover was with Penguin Random House, but someone independent that's audio only has the audio rights, but a production company is actually hiring you and paying you so that you can get paid under a union contract. I feel like it's a thing where people first off have to decide what they want to do. At least for me, that's how it worked. What do I want to do? Who do I want to be in this space? Also considering that some people who have the jobs will consider you the way that they consider you, regardless of who you want to be and what you want to do. Also being aware of that. Then figuring out, as Kirt was saying, well, how does that work for me to pay my bills and, also to fulfill myself artistically? So I think it's like 3 compartments, maybe. Like, what is the work? What is the art? What is the meaning? And then the practical side, which could be, to pay your bills, to be able to go on vacation, to have more time to spend with your loved ones, but also the business side. We didn't even talk about that. Working with someone who's easy to work with as opposed to someone who's not, someone who wants you to do royalty share, but they are asking for the moon and the stars.
Amen.
Do you see what I'm saying? So I feel like all of that kind of rolls around together to figure out what is the high quality work for you. Because it could be that even royalty share with a great relationship partner in doing this work that's going to get you into the genre that you want other people to notice you in. Do you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden it's like a 23 book cozy mystery series, But I think you have to start with you, right? You have to start singular in the one place and then figure out where you want to go. And maybe in doing that, attract to you the things, to put yourself in the places, to do the things that you want to do, to meet the people that I understand the whole thing of not wanting to put yourself out there. So I'm not negating those feelings. But if you know that about you, then you can set up maybe a timetable of when you would be comfortable. Do you want to give yourself a 60 book mark, since that doesn't really exist as the end all of everything? It's kind of, I feel like it's kind of open to whatever possibility you want to make of it. And sometimes you have to do something. Sometimes it has to be 80% just to find out what actually works.
Yeah.
Being fearless while still being afraid.
So, Deanna,
Yes.
what works for you?
What works for me?
Uh-huh.
Connections, right? So do I connect to the story? Do I connect to the character, the people that I'm working with? Even if it's the engineer or the editor, like, are we vibing? Like, do we understand, what is it you're asking me to do? Like, and I think it's reciprocal, right? I love to be easy to work with, but sometimes personalities and expectations, they just don't vibe. Being able to identify those and work through those, or unfortunately, let that one thing go because everything you're doing is not working, like being able to identify that and being okay with it, and then moving on to the next thing. Now, when it comes to like awards and reviews, I'm not saying I don't want awards and I'm not saying I don't want to be reviewed, but I'm not focusing on that. If I'm enjoying what I'm doing, that's great. If I'm able to pay my bills, see people sometimes, like go out to dinner, like I'm good. I don't necessarily need the award to do that. And that's as a person in the past that has won some things and hasn't won some things. So that's not necessarily a focus. Like I said, I think that would be great, but I pretty much lurk and I look at everything. So to see someone who gets like the greatest accolade of the year and then possibly is having some trouble in the next year or two, and I'm just going to use Halle Berry. How do you win the Oscar and then have the year you had after that?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's happened more than once, and it's happened to different people. So I don't know. Like I said, I think all of that is wonderful. I'd love to go to the parties and hobnob with everybody, but I can't make that the focus. Like if I'm doing that one book and the author tells me it's great, I'm fine. The producer is like, your work is beautiful. The engineer is like, your audio is pristine. I'm good. I'm good with that. Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. Like, I was thinking about it and I was like, yeah, I don't see a chasm. And I've heard it. I've even been told it. Yeah. And I was like, I don't necessarily see it that way for me. Cause like theater, there's that saying, you're only as good as your last gig, you know, where, you know, and then on the other spectrum, you have people go, you've never worked on Broadway? And I'm like, there's a lot of us who have never worked on Broadway. Okay, dear. And actually I was in merchandising. So whatever. So do you see what I'm saying? Right. So I understand and I empathize with people who feel blocked in a way because they feel like they're trapped in being in one place. But I don't necessarily think the market works that way. I don't think publishing works that way anymore because the indie author from tomorrow could be the best-selling, traditionally published author, you know, with a film coming out, you know, or a series like based on what they're doing. And then the person who was the toast of the town for the last 3 years, all of a sudden, no one's buying their book and they have to indie publish. They still have their fans. You know what I mean? So I just think it's different. You know, like there's no shame with an actor who was only a movie star now doing commercials and selling tires because that's what's happening, because that's what the market is, you know, where people would never go back to television or never go back to Broadway, say like 5, even 10 years ago, where that's like the norm, where people just have cycles, you know?
I can see what people are saying now, though, about a chasm in terms of like moving across it for the first time is really daunting. And I think in either direction, because I've heard stories from both. Because for me, I didn't do my first publisher book until like 2021 or something. So there was a few years where I was indie only. And leaping that chasm was difficult because like it was a different group of people that I had to meet and connect with. I had to get on their radar in a different way. Like I had to sort, you know, so there is a barrier there for them recognizing that you're worth their time and that you're worth adding to their roster and keeping in mind. And then there's absolutely a chasm that goes the other way that Ronnie, you alluded to with folks who've only worked publishing their whole careers. Now in the last couple of years are finding that that doesn't fill their schedule to 100% anymore necessarily. And I've had a few people come to me and be like, how do you do indie? Because it is a different process. Like you don't have the producer there running interference for you anymore. You're the producer. You have to hire the editor and the proofreader. You have to set the schedule with the indie author and with the editor to be like, this is when I'm getting my files to you. This is when you're getting the files back to me. And like Deanna alluded to, you are managing any interpersonal shit that comes up with that author. You have no producer barrier between you. So like you have to set the expectations in a healthy way at the beginning, and you have to like maintain that relationship in a good way and make sure you get paid. You know, like make sure that person, Sasha agrees, make sure that doesn't ghost you without paying you or doesn't like, you know, so it is a skill set, and it's the skill set of being a producer that you have to add on to the skill set of being an audiobook narrator in order to be successful in indie markets. And I think a lot of veteran narrators are having to learn that skill set for the first time and like learn how to connect with indies. So it is, Andre's right, it is a chasm that needs to be, you got to kind of slowly build a bridge across.
Mm-hmm. Well, but speaking of bridges between chasms, this is what I was thinking about as Deanna was talking about like how publishing is evolving and how an author can be an indie darling and then become a big 5 success story. It hasn't felt from where I'm sitting like that bridge stays up or down, or however you get over a bridge, whether it's up or down, that the bridge stays accessible for folks behind the folks who made it across. Because part of the reason why I started to seek publisher work is that the work I loved to do, queer romance, was basically just successful in the indie space. And then Red, White, and Royal Blue happened.
Right.
And suddenly, oh, queer stories are popular. And so there was this part of me that was clearly wrong, but there was a part of me that was like, oh, well, they'll come a knocking any day now because I'm popular in this genre, and the genre has become popular with big 5 publishers. So obviously what they will do is they will look to those of us who are already doing it, and we will be brought along.
Oh no.
That's not at all.
Yeah,
how
sorry.
That works. so that feeling of like, oh, the work I want is being elevated, is going to this higher profile, and I'm reaching for it, and my hand's getting slapped because it's like, well, you do indie. Yeah. Like the 200 books I've done don't warrant a second.
Have you? I'm sorry to interrupt. Have you literally had that experience where someone has said to you or intimated that we're not going to consider you for this big 5 queer book because you've only done indie, or you're an indie guy?
No one has said that specifically, no.
But do you feel it's been intimated, or you felt that way?
I certainly see people who don't have my indie background succeeding and getting titles that I don't, most of the time, don't even get considered for.
And do those other people have audiobook experience?
Less than me when they started, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot less. Like there are people who, started in like 2021, 2022, who have a lot of big 5 titles that I don't even get the audition. And a lot of times it's with people I've actually worked with before. Like I have the connection. I've done the book because the author brought me with them, but it was just that one author. And it didn't seem to extend to anything else. You're not top of mind.
Yeah.
For them. So and again, clearly that impression of mine was wrong. That's not how it works. But there was some part of me from like my background in not the publishing world that it made sense to me that like, well, I have the experience doing this work, and therefore I will be valuable to doing this work in the future.
Or it will be top of mind at minimum. Yeah.
Or, Googleable. They'll Google male romance and they'll see my name, and that'll matter.
I'm going slightly off topic here, but just to resume, the vagaries of this business is that it's so personal in the sense that the people who are making the decisions or looking to make the decisions are singular people, and they don't often have either the time or the resources to look beyond what's right in front of them.
Right.
I think. And I'm not making excuses for them. I think that's the reality that I tell myself when I'm figuring out how do I get a book that I want to get, or how do I get seen the way I want to get seen.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson to learn, that nobody's looking for you.
Yeah.
Nobody's out there looking for you. You have to just be standing in front of them at the right moment. Or have somebody who is your advocate, your fan, putting your name in the mix.
I wanted to you sparked a thought when you were talking about, the bridge and going in one direction, and Lindsey mentioned this, going in the other direction. I have seen, in some cases, I've seen recently, authors who have had contracts with publishing companies for a long time, in this age of social media and understanding now the power of their own fan base, moving to produce for themselves and independently, and keeping all of the money, or however percentage of the money
as Amazon lets them keep.
Exactly. But now it's just they're just splitting it with Amazon, and not with Amazon and the publisher, right? And I see that happening. Not a ton. I mean, I see a very small section of the world, and maybe you all have input for this, but I see it happening. I see examples of it happening. And the question that I put to you, Deanna, I will answer for myself, which is, can I use a Venn diagram? Can I be a math nerd and talk about a Venn diagram? It's like, there's a circle that's like, my fulfillment, being fulfilled as an artist. And then there's being in control of my destiny, right? And then money.
Yeah.
And right in the middle of that is where I'm trying to live. and what I'm shooting for right now. And I've seen, and that wasn't true for me even like maybe 2 years ago. But in the last year, I've come to that understanding. That's where I'm going for. That's where I want to live.
Yeah. Two things. One about something you just said about this idea of, no one's looking for you. You are kind of responsible for putting yourself out there. That actually to me is what seems so interesting about indie work, is that it is typically you doing almost all of the putting yourself out there, that you finding that connection, you ideally matching yourself up with people who are, whose book is going to be right. And that presumes you're doing a lot of like direct, lead hunting, finding books, inviting authors to work with you, et cetera, as opposed to indie authors finding you. Kirt, what's my
what happened to my face right there?
Yeah.
I have experienced the opposite. In indie work, people do seek me out.
Kurt's just the most popular guy.
No, but what indie authors will pay attention to who listeners like.
Yeah.
And so they do their research. They look for who are the people doing the most popular titles, or the titles that I liked the most, or the people who write books that are similar to the books that I'm writing, who is narrating for them. And they will reach out and they will say, I've never listened to an audiobook in my life. I have no idea what you do, but this person, you narrated this story for this person, and I'm kind of doing the same thing. So can I hire you?
Yeah.
So my experience has actually been in indie, they do look for you. And that was what I was expecting when it came to the big 5 publishers or like production houses that are doing casting. And it was like, oh, no. It doesn't work the same over there at all.
But here, what's interesting though, is to a certain degree, it can, in that same respect I was talking about earlier, where if an author, especially because authors are often friends in both spaces, traditional and indie, that if an author is like, oh, my friend's super well-received audiobook had this narrator, that's exactly who I want. And they're going to request that person coming in, or at least get an audition from that person coming in. That seems like, it feels like those parallels continue, but that there are all these different kind of segments of like what happens in the middle before the book actually gets to you. Because there are plenty of people, Kirt, who do well and make a full-time earning from just indie work, but are not necessarily being sought after by indie authors. They are doing their own like lead finding work. But it just becomes, in the end, the more we talk about it, the more I'm seeing what Deanna saw at the beginning of this conversation, that really the chasm is maybe about the crossing and not about the actual distance or the actual differences between these two spaces.
Yeah, I've had maybe like 2 or 3 indie authors seek me out, which like every time was like, me? You want to talk to? Like, it was so wonderful. And like those projects have been some of my favorites. They've been really wonderful. But mostly with indie, it's me saying hello to people myself.
Well, and again, maybe that's just like the rare air I breathe as a white guy in male romance.
Listen, by the time I got to the lesfic community, Abby Craden and Laurie Prince were already there, nailing it left and right. So I'm like, are they busy? Can you not afford them? Right. Here I
am. But that's so interesting, because that is how I used to sell myself. I used to say, like, if Michael Crouch is busy, please give it to me.
Right.
And like, it took a long time before I really created my own voice and my own style and my own confidence. And like, no, this is what I do. Actually, I don't want to emulate Michael. I love him. I love his work. I'm a fan. But I no longer want to emulate him. I no longer just want his cast-offs. Like, I want the books that are right for me. And sometimes I see books at big 5 publishers where I'm like, why wasn't I in the mix for that? Like, I'm perfect for that. And it's, like, it's about a thing that I talk about all the time. And it's like, I've included it in like every get to know me session, email thing.
I went up to a publisher after the Audies and I went, how come I was not on any of those books? I can't believe I did it. And the next day I thought, oh my God. And I don't drink. I wasn't high.
I was about to ask how many cocktails were involved.
I think I was just feeling myself. Yeah. And I was like, how could you have all those books up in there? And I was like, where was I? you know? So that's one way you could do it.
I guess.
And I was going to say, like, listen, there are chasms on chasms on chasms. It's not just indie to publisher. There are indie tier chasms. There are publisher chasms. Like, I feel often the chasm every day between like mid-list, backlist, and front list. I'm like,
yes,
how do I get over that? These books are great. Thank you. Cool. Can I have one of those? Maybe.
Yeah.
Like, so I feel like we're always trying to build these bridges and cross these little chasms across the whole expanse of things.
Yeah.
But don't you think that's part of the issue, is feeling like we have to earn that work when time and time and time again, we see that people can be right for a book without tons of experience, without, having done that genre 1,000 times. They could be brand new to it's whether you're right for the book really has very little to do with how many emails you've sent to producer.
Mhm.
Like it could be somebody's first email to a producer and they just happen to be exactly the person that producer was looking for. So that feeling of like, I gotta hustle and earn my way, like I think we all need to throw that away and just be like, you might be the right person for that front list title that you want, and it doesn't matter how much you've done before. But if you don't put yourself in front of the person who can give you that job, you're never going to get it. The most important part is being in front of the person who's casting. Then the fact that we all still, put like the number of titles we've done in so many places, it's like it doesn't really matter, does it? If you're a good storyteller and you're capable as a narrator, whether it's a self-record or going to a studio, and if you're right, you're right.
I feel like you're talking about the stuff or the difference between the stuff that we can control, right? That's us actually making the connections, making sure we're top of mind, staying current, that sort of thing. And then stuff we can't control. Like, we don't cast the book,
Yeah.
I mean, unless we're the producer, and yes, we actually are casting the book. But no, because like, I mean, and I understand that, right? Because sometimes being in touch with your emotions, right? Or being able to be emotional about certain things helps us in this work. But when it comes to the other side of it, right? The nuts and bolts of the business side of making those connections or doing auditions, or you know what I mean? Like the work of it, it's not exactly the same thing as, the hope and I pray and that. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so, and again, not something we can really control, because sometimes your emotional side is exactly why you would get cast for that book, whatever the connection is, or, whatever the performance was that you gave, if there was an audition involved, or from the work that you've previously done. And they were like, oh, they have to be in the mix for this book. But again, we absolutely have no control over that. And I would even go back to what Ronnie was saying before about the resources and the time to do things. Like if we think about how a lot of people are doing this work, sometimes there's full teams of people and that's all they do is cast the book. That's so different than that one mom and pop shop that literally is doing everything and also has a full-time job. Do you know what I mean? Because they're doing this on nights and weekends as a producer. I think we have to take all of that into account. But again, to kind of support what that question is and what the answer is to it, Kirt, is like, how do we find the balance to be okay with the things that are not within our control?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they directly affect us, the results of whatever those decisions are. I think that's the crux of it, right? Like, how do we become comfortable? And not only that, how do we become functional in not being able to control every aspect of what this process is for us? Whether it's in the indie world or, because even working indie, specifically ACX, you cannot control everything. because you cannot control that author. You cannot control what their thoughts and expectations are. Even though after the first 15, you should just be able to work.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's not the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying too is triggering for me the idea of not letting outside information influence whether you feel you're ready for something. Because
Well,
I think like that 60 book limit, that's an outside thing. That was somebody else at some point thought this was the right amount for me, and now I'm going to start telling other people that that's the right amount for them.
Yeah.
And if you as the narrator are thinking, am I ready to put myself in front of a big five casting person? And the answer is yes. Then let go of the outside stuff that's telling you no. It's almost like the person who needs permission to cast you is you first.
Yes, I agree with that. Yes, 100%. Because it's kind of one of the things of like going back to like title numbers. There are people who care about title numbers. So I'm aware that people care about title numbers as long as I'm getting enough title numbers to pay my bills. That's all I really care about. But I keep track of my title numbers so that I can give that information to the people who really care about it. Same thing with reviews, awards or lack of awards. I know that there's some people like they're not really going to read my email unless it specifically says whatever nominated or winner of blah, 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 and I'm okay with that. I have a dossier, I just make a note. We don't always know who we're auditioning with. We don't know what pool of people we're in, with every title, but maybe there's the possibility that people are allowing that to control what their actions are, even from the beginning, like trying to figure out what they want. It was very freeing as an actor to stop doing that because sometimes they don't know what they want. Yeah. It's not written in the brief for the audition. They just describe to you maybe something, one or two things about a couple different characters, maybe. Or they just give you the words to read and that's it. And you just have to decide, And even the piece that you're doing as part of the audition doesn't tell you anything about the characters. It's literally just a slice of life. So what are you supposed to do with that? I mean, it's going to be different for every person, right? However they interpret that. Again, something we absolutely cannot control. And even if I do it today, it might be better tomorrow, or I might be tired tomorrow. So again, stuff we cannot control. So I don't know, we could spiral. And I guess people are spiraling, which is why we're having this conversation in the first place. But I think it's so interesting because I never really thought about outside influences. I guess I'm just so used to data collecting and deciding what I'm going to take from it and then leaving the rest, like literally on digital paper. But
that is a true gift. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing about you.
Look, decades of practice. I'm not saying I was like this at 20.
And I love that even more because I would like to believe that someday I could be better at getting out of my own way. I know I get in my own way a lot. I know that.
It's a little bit like taking a deep breath, like a real deep breath. Like not just up shallow in the lungs, but like the whole core. And you're like, I didn't realize I could breathe like that.
I have seen fellow narrators achieve things because they asked for them. And like, my thought is the audacity to ask for what you wanted.
How dare you?
I was like, oh, that's something that I need to change. That's not, and it takes a beat and it takes a little bit of like looking from the outside in and being like, oh, wait, all they did was ask for something they wanted. No harm in that.
That's a nice Western boy in you.
Yeah. There's this thing y'all are saying too about shirking this idea that you have to earn something, I feel is playing out as relevant for me. I have been working with publishers There's one publisher who I have done 18 titles for them, and just last week I recorded my first standalone, full-length adult audience novel for them. And there's a part of me that wants to think about something like that and think that that's like a process of earning, but it's not necessarily. It's just what they've cast me in over time. It's not to say that they wouldn't have trusted me with this same book 3 years ago. Another publisher I've been working with a similar amount of time, I just, for the first time with any publisher ever, a couple weeks ago, got an audition for a project with a higher rate that indicates like it's a wider audience title, right? And there's a narrative in my head when something like that arrives in front of me that's like the result of like time put in, as opposed to just trusting that this was just the right thing that they wanted me to audition for at the right time. And even thinking about the inverse, I'm right now in the process of doing my like one indie book a year and like setting that up with the author. And I feel like there is constantly this expectation in my head about one. Sometimes it's quality. Sometimes, and I will say that out loud and be true about it. That sometimes there's this expectation in my head that the indie books don't get as much editing, that they don't get as that they might be like you're chugging out 10 books a year. They might not all get the same level of attention. And sometimes that is true. I've worked with an author who has acknowledged as much, and it's not about the fact that they don't care about their books, but it's just that that's the process for them. They want to be putting out a story, and it's about the journey the story is taking and not necessarily about the detail of the prose. And I feel like I have to keep exploring for myself. One, how often that idea is being upended in my head. That author who was like, yeah, I'm pumping out these books. Listen, that's what I'm here to do. The first title I did for them was probably the most fun I've ever had in the booth, like ever. Another project that I was like, I have really, really slowly stepped like one toe at a time into the indie romance space and did a title recently that I was like, oh my God, like this feels like Simon and Schuster should have published it, right? Like, what does that mean? But like beautiful, beautiful prose, such a fun story. And I feel like I do have those expectations in my head that have kept me from actively trying to connect with indie authors and actively trying to build my bridge in that direction to do more of that work. Because I think the assumption, like you said, Ron, has been that like the thing that's going to most fulfill me might be the thing I'm already in, or this is somehow like a gatekeeper of quality or like a purveyor of quality. And I think more and more like it's not necessarily the case. You will also find people in the traditional publishing space who are pumping out books, or there are just different things to be found in different spaces. And I think that is the shift that I need to make is actively thinking like, where is the work that I want? And recognizing that actually there's a wider valley beyond production houses and the work is also there, everything the light touches is yours, Simba. Like, yeah.
And the through line really does seem to be that like we would like to be doing it all, which is not a selfish thing to ask for. Like we would like to, because something, André, that you just said really struck me, which is that sometimes indie work can be really joyful because there's a lot less pressure there.
Yeah,
it's not going to be run by 6 to 10 other people before it goes onto the marketplace. Like it's you're doing the whole damn thing. And so you can make a fun choice. You can, listen, sometimes we do things just to amuse ourselves.
To talk about what you just said, the pressure to do it the right way. And I'm not sure what that is, although we may all have a different idea of what that is. When you were talking about, the limitation being in your head. The point I want to make is that I did a lot of things early on as a narrator with publishers that people came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh my God, you shouldn't do that. That's not the way you're supposed to do that." And they were wrong.
Yeah.
they weren't right. They also weren't wrong. It was the fact that I made the choices that I made that made me joyful, and that came out of my own instinct, and they weren't what was acceptable or what was thought of as the norm for a particular genre or a particular thing. But I didn't know any better because I wasn't listening and I wasn't trying to get that feedback. I was just like, okay, I can do this. Boom, And I think that helped me early on develop the sense of doing my thing. Just doing my thing, That's all. It just made me think of that.
I love this. I think we've been on a beautiful journey through. I don't even want to reinforce these divisions anymore. Through all the places we find our audiobook work, and through the places that audiobook work finds us. And I'm personally curious to see what this means for all of us in 2025. What's going to worm its way through the inbox. But thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Ronnie, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
And thank you, dear listener, for joining us at the Narrator Roundtable. If you want to join the conversation, you can find us on social media or visit our website, narratorroundtable.com, to submit a question or a topic of discussion for a future episode. What's on your mind? We want to talk about it.
The Narrator Roundtable is produced and hosted by André Santana, Deanna Anthony, Gail Shalan, Kirt Graves, and Lindsey Dorcus. All copyrighted material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.